No, we're not streaming. Okay. Hello, everyone. Sorry about all the technical difficulties today. We've decided to not stream for today due to some technical issues, but we're going to be recording this and this will be released very promptly as well. So hello to everyone. We are going to finally get started and talk about today basic prototyping and design accessibility. So I did my little spiel earlier already about kind of what this is all about, but I'm going to go ahead and start with the slides in a second. Nick, when did you copy this community file?
Where did I copy this?
When did you duplicate it?
Like earlier today.
I updated it an hour ago.
Oh.
So we're gonna go through here instead. Actually, yeah. Cool. Okay, so today's basic agenda, we're going to be talking first about the midterm. So I mentioned this last week, we are releasing the midterm starting today. You're going to have 2 weeks to work on it. I'll get into all the details in just a moment, but we're going to talk through it. There's no homework this week and there's no homework next week. We're also going to be talking about basic prototyping, kind of these functions, and then design accessibility. The forms are up here. They're also on the board. So bit.ly/FDSP22-5 is for attendance. But yeah, going straight into the midterm. If you have any questions about this as I'm talking, please wait till the end to discuss, and then we'll chat about it a little bit. But your prompt for this midterm is to create a project about a local restaurant. So for the midterm, we really do want to see you basically follow a project all the way through from start to finish, following one of 4 set prompts that we have provided with the option to create your own prompt. So why are we centering this around local restaurants? You know, what's the importance of selecting this as a user group or selecting this as kind of the basis for what you're designing? This is mainly built from 3 reasons. The first is this idea of personal familiarity. We want you to pick a business that you are personally close to, or something that you know, maybe it's a comfort food for you, maybe it's something that you ate a lot growing up, maybe it's a family business of some kind. Because you're able to select something that you personally know, you have been to, maybe your friends have been to, maybe your family has been to, you'll be able to conduct some level of user research with people that you know or with yourself. And analyzing your own experiences is a great way to break down what are the needs for this item that I am designing. The second reason is tangibility. A lot of the basic design prompts that you'll see on the internet frequently go about like, oh, do some like hypothetical thing for XYZ that doesn't really exist and you're never going to actually make it exist and exist for some kind of company that isn't real. But because we want to establish real design practice, we want you to select a real restaurant that you have been to, because this helps you more easily visualize the actual problems that you're going to be tackling and develop tangible solutions. And the final reason we chose local restaurants is because of the sense of community that surrounds a lot of food and a lot of culture. Restaurants inherently create culture by providing a space for people to gather, for people to talk, for people to eat together. And as you design, consider both the physical location of the staff, the restaurant, as well as the community that it encompasses. You know, if it's a kind of cultural food, if it's just a place in your neighborhood that you go to a lot, think about how the restaurants on the South Side in Berkeley differ from the restaurants in downtown, differ from the restaurants in North Side, how different places like 4th Street feel like a completely different city almost from different parts of Berkeley. So thinking about the sense of community that a restaurant can bring is important as you kind of approach this project. The 4 prompts are based around visual design and UI UX. We know that if you took this class, you're likely to be interested in at least one of these 2 topics, but there is also an option to do an open-ended proposal. So of visual design, there are 2 separate prompts that you can go with. The first is branding. This is focusing on any existing branding that the restaurant has and creating something new, along with 1 marketing illustration. So this goes into their system, you know, they're all of their colors and type things that we talked about in week 2, and then doing some kind of illustration based on the redesigned branding that you're going to implement. The second option is if you're interested more in illustration, if you really like last week's content, if you like the vector tools a lot, you can create 3 illustrations inspired by the restaurant. This is less something that's like utilitarian and more something that's like, I really loved these 3 foods growing up, I'm going to draw them, or just doing something that's a little bit more creative if you really enjoy art in some kind of way. The 2 UI UX prompts are web and mobile. The web prompt is a redesign prompt, while the mobile prompt is a create a new design prompt. This is because we assume most restaurants have a website, but most restaurants do not have their own mobile app. If you choose a restaurant that does have a mobile app, please let us know and we'll figure out something because the prompt is a little bit different. For web, we're going to be asking you to redesign the existing website. A lot of like local restaurants, a lot of kind of family businesses don't tend to have like the most brushed up, dribble new top 100 best modern like website designs. A lot of them are pretty bare bones. A lot of them use kind of website builders. So we want you to examine the restaurant's existing site and create 3 to 4 screens showing different levels of fidelity, and then make sure that everything is in basic desktop dimensions. This also requires that you use components and variants in some way throughout your entire project. And likewise, the illustration and visual design prompts require that you use the pen tool and vector networks in some way. So going back to the UI UX prompts, the second option is a mobile prompt. This is to design a delivery app specific to the restaurant. We specifically scoped this to be a delivery app because we found it easy to define what kind of features you need to include. If you want to design an app for something that is slightly different, that is okay, but we want you to submit a proposal for it. Like one example that we had last semester, or a couple semesters ago, was for a ramen restaurant where it didn't really make sense to have a delivery app because delivering ramen is not the best way to eat it. So they instead decided to make a queuing app to basically make a wait list for the restaurant. This is similar in scope of creating 3 to 4 screens, showing low, mid, and different fidelity wireframes and making everything in phone dimensions. But we wanted to be a focus on new design rather than a redesign, which is why we've added that stipulation. So as I've mentioned a couple of times, there's also this option to do an open-ended prompt. We would still like for it to be focused on a local restaurant, but we're going to allow you to come up with something completely different. If none of these 4 prompts sound particularly interesting to you, you're more than welcome to submit your own idea. If you would like to do this, you have to submit a proposal for this different idea by Friday, and you must indicate, what kind of requirements you have based on the requirements that we've provided for the other prompts, as well as whether or not you're going to use the pen tool or components. You must select one of those 2 skills to kind of showcase in your midterm project in this proposal. These are due this Friday at 11:59 p.m. You must submit some kind of idea if you are interested in doing this. If you want to go with one of the first 4 defined prompts, you do not have to submit anything this Friday. You can go ahead and just work on it. If you have any other kind of miscellaneous questions that are just smaller things, please message your TA or me if you have any questions about any of that. The midterm itself is going to be due Monday, March 14th, which is Pi Day, and it's going to be due the night before lecture 7. So that's basically 2 weeks from today, minus 1 day from Monday. It'll be due at the end of the night, not 5 p.m. like we usually do, but it will be due Monday night instead of Tuesday. We'll also be allowing up to 70% credit up until that Friday, and your submission needs to be 2 parts, but 1 submission. The Figma file should encompass your entire process. So all of your low, mid, high fidelity, all of your user research. We do really want to see some level of user research from everybody. And this should be linked in part of your write-up. The write-up is pretty short. We don't want you to write like 3 pages. You need to write like an entire case study about it. But give us maximum 300 words, giving a little bit more insight into your thinking process, anything that isn't clearly articulated in your design file, and particularly talking about the research process and any of the challenges that you hit while you were working on this. For the most part, design is not always smooth sailing. So we do want to hear, what did you struggle with? What did you decide to change as you worked on this project? So again, your submission is going to be 1 PDF that has the write-up plus a link to the Figma file. Make sure that it's set to be shared with us, make sure that we can open it, et cetera, and make sure that you actually included it. If you need a slip day, we have a slip day policy in this class. You can receive 1 free slip day, which is 24 additional hours that'll be applied to either the midterm or the final without penalty. If you take a slip day on both, we'll count it for the final because it's a higher grade point value, but we'll automatically apply it where it's best fit. That being said, if you know you need more time, please just reach out to your TA immediately or as soon as you know that you need more time. We are happy to make accommodations. The big reason why we want things due the day that we have them is so that you can talk about them with your teams and talk about them in lecture. But please just tell us if you need more time. We are more than happy to accommodate. Also, if you have a DSP note, feel free to let us know. Apologies for not mentioning this earlier in the semester, but if you have any DSP accommodations that call for more time on a midterm or more time on homework or any other accommodations, please let me know, message me on Slack or email me, and we'll make sure to get you what you need. All right. The entire prompt for the midterm can be found at this link, bit.ly/Figma Decal midterm. We'll be sharing this out in the Slack later tonight as well, if you have any questions, but any questions right now about the prompt? Sweet, okay. I'm very excited. I love looking at these midterms. A lot of them have been really fun restaurants that are local to Berkeley, or something that like has been really personal to the designer as well. So please have fun with it. So with that, we're gonna move on to our first real topic of lecture, which is design accessibility, taught by Cecilia.
Hi everyone, I hope you're having a good evening. Today we're going to be talking about one of the most important realms of design, and that's accessibility. And while you may not have signed up for the Figma Decal to learn about like design as a whole, I think that accessibility is one of the most important topics that you should be consciously thinking about in any sphere of design. So let's dive right into it. So what is accessibility exactly? So in my personal opinion, I think that any type of design, including anything you might make on Figma, should have the end goal of making our world perhaps a more navigable or accessible or intuitive place for people to interact with. Yeah, for people to exist and interact with the world. And so what accessibility does is it seeks to ensure that whatever you're making can be accessed and used by everyone in a totally functional and engaging way, regardless of what kind of skill set they have, what kind of education level they have, what kind of ability they have. And a big part of accessibility in design is considering what people with certain disabilities might have trouble accessing without this conscientious thought about accessibility. So disabilities are often defined in a couple of ways, as you'll see here. They might be considered a physical or mental impairment that limits a certain individuals to do specific activities, or it might be considered to be the inability or limitation of a certain environment to accommodate for an individual's needs. So you can sort of think of that as what we like to call a mismatched persona. So you might think of disabilities as a sort of manifestation of a mismatched persona, not so much as like a permanent condition, but as a condition in a specific environment resulting from a number of interacting factors. So if you look at this chart on the right, you can see that there are a lot of different kinds of individuals that might have a disability in a given environment. So a person with one arm might struggle to use some sort of physical product like interacting with some type of door handle, or someone with an accent or a language barrier. If they don't speak the language in whatever country they're in, they might be having a hard time using whatever product is available to them. And that is more of a situational mismatch. So just to recap, we might consider a disability, at least in terms of design, to be a mismatch between a person and their environment. And again, some of this might be physical, some of these cases might be physical or mental conditions. Some of these might just be a situational condition wherein a person can't use something because of the environment that they're in. And just to preface, I personally don't identify as an individual with a disability, and people with disabilities identify themselves, and it's important to always be conscientious of that. So even though I might have trouble like accessing some things in certain situations, I typically can't speak to having any sort of like long-term condition as an individual. So I also love talking about language. And I think that language is a really important thing to consider when we're talking about design. Language is always changing and we use it in different ways. And the same way you might notice that like slang changes over time, or the way that, like pop culture implements certain use of different words, language is also important to consider in accessibility. As our society and culture shifts, a lot of a lot of phrases in the realm of accessibility might originally be considered perhaps like more sensitive, but over time they can be taken negatively or interpreted poorly. So let's take a look at the term hearing impaired. Over time, or originally, while this was used to sort of accommodate for people with hearing disabilities, it sort of hones in on the impairment as an aspect of someone's personhood. And so it ties a person to this hearing impairment. Over time, we've seen that term has been phased out a little bit more, and a lot of people tend to prefer deaf or hard of hearing. And again, this is up to the individual. And so if someone identifies as deaf or hard of hearing, but prefers a different term, that's always important to keep in mind. And we do our best to utilize the language that makes people feel safe and comfortable. And if you are someone that isn't experiencing some type of disability in an environment, especially where someone is, it is important to make sure that, you know, they have their comfort and their needs met in that situation. Shifting gears a little bit, we're going to take a look at this pyramid of design. And it sort of lays out a couple different types of accessibility in design. So a couple definitions here. We first have usable design. And what usable design is pretty straightforward. It just means that your designs are working functionally. They're easy to navigate, intuitive to use, and your users can use them as they've been intended to be used. Another principle of or another type of accessible design is called, in fact, accessible design. And essentially our goal in accessible design is to accommodate for the needs of a given group of people to make sure that they can use our product. Inclusive design is another really important term. And what inclusive design intends to do is just to basically include as many people as possible. It wants to make sure that whoever, no matter who they are, can use your design. Yeah, and the three sort of tie together in a way that we'll examine in just a little bit. So accessibility is a pretty big component in visual design. A lot of you that are taking Figma Decal might be interested in visual design, and there are a couple key features of visual design where accessibility plays a pretty big role. And you can see that there are, I'll go over a couple common ways that we try to make visual design more accessible. So we have something called the image description, and sometimes it's called alt text. So you might see in your like Instagram posts like that some like infographics tend to post alt text explaining what their infographics mean. Here we're looking at a picture of Ace and a description about him. And so the image description reads, photo of Ace Chen surrounded by turquoise and yellow decorative shapes, he, him pronouns. And what that does is if someone needs to have like a description of the picture read to them, they can do that, and they can also get a better sense of what the image is conveying. Another important feature of accessible design, accessibility in visual design is color contrast. And so if you have some sort of vision disability or anything like that, the text and the background that they appear on may not always be compatible, and it might not always be clear for everyone to be able to see or read text. So they need to be discernible enough from each other in terms of the colors that they are, so that the contrast between them is readable. And then another pretty basic feature of accessibility in visual design is captioning. I think a lot of us have heard of closed captioning. We've seen it on YouTube videos. It's been more and more available in like Zoom recordings and lectures. And it basically just transcribes audio into text. So again, users that are hard of hearing might use captioning when they're listening to something or watching something so that they have the written description in front of them. These are just a couple features of accessibility in design, and there are tons of other ways that visual design, can be made more accessible. But yeah, these are just some of the most common ways. So let's look at a little case study of color contrast. And so we have here a map of the all the BART lines, and we might consider here people who have low vision or some sort of deficiency in their color vision, where it might affect how they view the map. So while a lot of people can see and differentiate the colors in all these different lines on this BART map, a lot of people also can't, or if we are viewing the map in black and white, it's really hard to distinguish where the different lines start and stop. And I can't really tell this line apart from this one. And these three all look the same. So I can't really distinguish them. And that becomes an issue if you have any sort of vision disability. So here are a couple situations in which this BART map might not be so accessible for people. Protanopia, I believe, is where you can't see reds and then greens start to become really salient. Deuteranopia is a lack of, or a confusion of like reds and greens, and then tritanopia is, I believe, a confusion of blues and yellows. So in a bunch of these different cases, the standard like this map won't work because the colors might blur together. You might not be able to differentiate them. And I just want to take a quick pause here. On this color map, or on this BART map, we're obviously relying on color. Can anyone in the class think of perhaps a way to create distinctions between lines without using color? How might we try to make this map more accessible to people with any sort of impairment in relation to color? Yeah.
Maybe like these dotted lines, like different spacing or like different shapes.
Yeah, that's a great idea. So you might, like draw different dashes or make some lines solid and some dotted. And so that might create like a different kind of way for you to differentiate the different BART lines. Yeah, and then creating different versions of the BART network might make it easier too for individuals with different types of vision to distinguish the different lines from each other as well. Okay, let's jump into a couple examples of what inclusive design looks like. And remember, the way that inclusive design is differentiated from accessible design is that it aims to include as many people as possible, whereas accessible design tries to accommodate for a certain group. So if you've ever been to a BART station, you know that there's this like bumpy yellow paving right in front of like where you'd enter the train. You see that at any sort of train station. That's so people like can know where it's safe to stand and warn them if they're getting too close to the platform before the train comes. Curb cuts are something that began in Berkeley through the efforts of Ed Roberts and some other disability rights activists who experienced like struggles, I guess, like getting onto sidewalks because they had to travel in wheelchairs, and if a curb didn't have like this curb cut where it was like slanted to like flat ground, you couldn't use a wheelchair to like get on the curb. Another example of accessible design becoming inclusive design is text-to-speech and speech-to-text translation. So having that back and forth between speech and text became really useful for people who needed to vocalize their thoughts or have their thoughts translated into text. And so if we take a look at all these examples, you might notice that like we interact with them pretty regularly in our daily lives. And they not only make our lives easier, but for some people, they make products like just simply available to use. Okay, let's look back at the design pyramid. So we talked about usable design, accessible design, and inclusive design. And yeah, we want to be at a point where our designs are inclusive of everyone that could possibly want to use our design without detracting from the functionality, the usability, the level of engagement that we have with our designs. So at the intersection of all of these is something called universal design. And universal design is sort of our ideal state where we synthesize everything that we set forth as goals from usable, accessible, and inclusive design. And so essentially, like I said before, our goal is to not detract from any of the functionality of our design, but we're trying to make it as functional as possible, as engaging as possible, as accommodating as possible, and as inclusive as possible without needing to add extra features on every time someone from like a different group of people tries to use our design. And so something that is meeting the like principles of universal design will ideally include everyone and be as like elitely functional as possible. So just a quick example, you might know the company Oxo, and one of their products is a grippy vegetable peeler. So some people who have arthritis have trouble gripping vegetable peelers and utensils and other kitchenware. And so what happens is that like these sort of tools might slip out of your hand. And what Oxo did was invent very grippy vegetable peelers. And yeah, what this did is essentially make vegetable peelers more inclusive. They obviously, because they weren't working for people with arthritis, it's pretty evident that they were designed without the needs of these people in mind. But because Oxo designed them, we now have grippy vegetable peelers. And I think this is a pretty good example of what inclusive design is because, yeah, it aims to make a product as functional as possible, and it doesn't detract from previous iterations of the product, but it also aims to include people, include everyone who might use it. And yeah, I think that it is definitely being put to use. I have a friend who uses these, and she has arthritis, and she's described them as lifesavers. And so if they had been designed in the first place with people who have arthritis in mind, or people who might have other disabilities, then this product might have been easier to use in the first place. All right, so I know I threw a lot of information and a lot of examples at you, but does anyone have any questions or comments just about accessibility in general, or accessibility in the visual design, or all the different design principles we just talked about? Questions? All right, then I will step back here and we will jump into basic prototyping. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Before we start, we're just going to take a quick 2-minute break. So I'm just going to pause the recording here, and we'll come back at 7:55. Typing. Yep. There's recording. All right. So in this section, we're going to talk about what is prototyping and what it's used for. Yeah. Okay, yeah. So prototyping is turning design concepts into tangible forms, and this could be like digital or physical, and to kind of tell, reveal insights of what you're designing it. So in the context of Figma for prototyping, we're oftentimes we're going to make a lot of different frames, and we're going to want to like kind of connect them, connect one with another. And this kind of helps us kind of demonstrate how interfaces will behave, and it kind of account for how users would kind of interact with different interfaces. So to quickly recall with fidelity that we talked about a couple of weeks ago. So low fidelity is basically general concept and layout of a design. And then mid fidelity, you're gonna maybe start having some text, kind of understanding what's gonna be where. And then your high fidelity is basically, you have everything pretty laid out, and it's all kind of good to go, and you can kind of start, doing those prototyping and kind of having those interactions with one another. So prototyping is basically, again, forming connections between two objects within a frame. You're going to have like a connection from A to B. You can also have B go back from B to A, and you can also have multiple objects. We'll talk about that a little later. Yeah, so in this case of Instagram, you can think of each of these frames as an instance and take these screenshots of an old TA's cat on their Instagram page. So here we can click on a post and it'll bring us to this next kind of frame or instance. And then when we click on this comment button here, it'll also take us to this new frame as well. Right, so here we can see from main page A all the way to the post B and then also to the comment section C. Okay, so all this is basically just prototyping. And like I mentioned earlier, you can have multiple connections from one object or frame. So we can go from A to C or A to B. All these kind of connections has to have a different trigger. We'll talk about triggers a little bit later as well. But yeah, so there can be multiple interactions made with different objects from the same frame. Okay, so we'll look again here at this Instagram post. Here we can see there's this like save / collection feature. So we can go here if we just click on it, it'll bring up this save to collection kind of pop up here. If we hold it, a different frame will show up, which is basically this new collection thing that you can start. So this is an example of having one object that can lead to two different results. So your prototype panel is where let's see. Yeah. So here in your Figma file, your prototype panel is usually in the top right here. Usually what we've been normally doing the first couple of weeks has just been on design panel. So we can always just switch to prototype and you can see all your different connections in prototype mode. Right. So yeah, so in your prototype panel, there's your device. You can pick different devices like an iPhone or iPad or tablet, etc. And then you can also change the background and also your starting frame. And then also there's this little triangle button up here, which also is basically presenting, and you can kind of present your prototypes. Yeah. So again, device settings, like I mentioned at first, there's different devices that you can use for your prototype. So you can put your iPhone, iPad, etc. And then you also can choose your background and also your starting frame. So your starting frame, again, is basically all the different frames that you created in your design file. If you choose not to use a preset device size, that's also fine. Our lecture slides is actually under that. So we have no device right now, right? So if you don't preset anything, it's just going to default into your screen size here. So again, we can go. So this is example of what our lecture slides will look like under a iPhone 11 display. So obviously this is not ideal, right? Because we're gonna have to kind of swipe over to the left and right just to get the entire gist of what that slide is trying to show. Same thing with the Surface Pro display. Again, it was not meant to be displayed on that device. So again, when you create your designs, especially on one of the midterm prompts, if you're building a design for your mobile app, make sure your frame and what you're building on your design file fits that frame. Okay, so that's just one thing that you should keep in mind. Okay, so talking about building connections here. So when you go to the prototype panel, you can see when you hover around a frame, this little plus icon, blue plus icon, will appear on that object. Okay, so when that appears, you can click on it and drag the node to another object to kind of make that connection. Okay, and then you can also use an interaction using the plus in the interaction panel. So I can show quickly, like right here in this case, you can see this node that pops up. I can click on it and then drag it to any other frame, and it'll create that connection. Okay, I'm not going to do it here. I don't want to mess up the lecture slides, but that is basically what it does. I think we'll also have a demo at the end of this, so hopefully we'll get there. Okay. Yeah, so then in components of prototyping, there's three different components. There's the trigger, so that means whether is it on click, drag, hovering, or mouse movement. That's kind of determines what your user interacting with. So what you're gonna do, what the user is gonna do. Okay, and then your actions are usually the reactions when the triggers are activated. So after clicking, how do you want your frame to go from frame A to frame B? So is that just overlaying or is it just swapping? So there's a bunch of different actions. We'll get into more detailed into actions later on too. And then lastly is the animations. So there's instant, dissolving, smart animate. This is kind of the same kind of animations you see in your like Google Slides. So it basically determines how prototype moves from one frame to another. Okay, yeah, so in the interaction details, so once you made that connection between your two frames, you can kind of edit it, right? So you can edit your trigger, you can pick whether you want click or on press, etc. And also your action and then your destination. So destination would be like frame 2 in this case. And then your animation, you can have, there's the animation type, easing curve, animation duration, and then there's usually an example of how the animation is going to be done. Yeah. So in this case right here, what we're doing here is connecting this big red square to this smaller orange square. What we're going to do here is actually smart animate, where you can see how it's actually, it's not going from instantaneously from the big one, big red into the small orange. And you can kind of see it's like animating to, going back and forth. And you see how we have two different flows here where we have, or two different connections here, where we have one pointing from the red to orange and again, orange back to red. Okay, so that's why it's kind of continuously going back and forth. Okay, we'll have more examples and we'll dive into smart animate and what it means a little later as well. Okay, really quickly, that was really quick, but any questions? We're doing good on that. All right. Okay, so prototyping functions. So now we kind of got the idea of what prototyping is. This is the fun part. When you kind of start making those connections and you're gonna have, seeing how all your different designs come together and kind of, into your final product. And so what can you do with this? There's a lot of different things. You can do buttons, you can navigate between frames and also create basic animations. Again, this week we'll cover the basic prototyping tools, and in week 8 or 9, we'll go into more details about more advanced different functions. So yeah, so like for instance here, we can see we're swiping between one page to another. That's an example of prototyping here. We also have a ball bouncing back and forth, and so on. Yep. So in lab this week, we're actually going to go over prototyping a sample Spotify interface. So in this case, in our search kind of page, we had a connection from this first album picture, and we're going to click on it, and then it's going to show the details of the album, so all the individual songs and so on and so forth. So yeah, so we have on click, navigate to, and then we're going to have slide in. So that's things sliding in from the left. And then the ease out is our easing curve, which we'll also talk about in like 2 slides. Okay. And then here we have the demo of what it will look like for easing in or sliding in. Okay. And then some prototyping examples of components. So last time when I took this class, it was still in beta. Ace, you can maybe, if you know if it's still in beta or not.
I think it's not.
Okay. But yeah, so if we see like all these checkboxes all have the same kind of, animation, same with the button clicks, and also when you're swiping emails, all has the same, right? So when you're working with components, it makes it a lot easier. We learned about components and variants like 2 weeks ago. So it just makes it a lot easier to kind of go through that without having to, make a million different connections for the same thing. Yeah, so then actions and animations. So there are a bunch of different types of actions like navigating, open overlay, scroll to, swap with, back, and close overlay, and open link. we're gonna touch on some of this in the demo at the end and also in the lab. So yeah, so these are just reactions to the triggers that you do, like on click and on press or hover, right? So yeah. So really quickly, what Open Overlay does is if you have like a phone screen, if you ever swipe down on your phone screen, this is actually opening an Open Overlay. So it's basically overlaying your it's overlaying part of your entire screen. Okay. So yeah, so this overlay is usually in a different frame. In our demo, we're gonna actually go over Open Overlay. So don't worry if this is a little too theoretical right now, but we'll have something practical to show in the end. Navigate to, I think this is probably one of the most basic ones that we can see. That just simply means going upon like clicking or your trigger, it just moves from one to another, right? So in this example, all we do is click, and it goes from big red square to the small one. Okay, and this is helpful for switching between different frames or instances in a prototype. Okay, and here are the other all the Figma animations and its demos. So there's quite a bit here. I encourage you to kind of look through this during the lab or your homework to kind of just get the idea of how all these interact with each other. But yeah, so there's a lot of different animations that you can try. And also you can edit these by using your different easing curves and also your animation times. Okay. So yeah, so easing curves. So usually in a linear ease, it's like a 1 by 1, right? So every second it goes by 1 centimeter, kind of very constant, right? So as you can see by this ball, it's like moving pretty linear. But that doesn't seem quite as natural, right? So let's take a look at the ease in and out. You see how it kind of follows more along the lines of the laws of gravity and kind of physics, etc. It kind of feels a little bit more natural to what you see in a natural world. So when you're kind of making designs and you're kind of thinking about making easing curves and kind of going prototype from one frame to another, you might want to kind of take that into account, right? To make it look a little bit more natural to the eye. Here are more examples of easing curves. So easing in, so you're kind of going from slow and then kind of bringing it up towards the end, and also the easing out. Yeah, so these are kind of different examples that you can kind of play around with when you're doing your lab and your homework assignment as well. Just trying to kind of make it seem as natural as possible when you're kind of showing the prototypes and when you're activating your trigger. Okay. So again, like when you're prototyping, there's a lot of different connections. So let's say in this example right here, we have daily tasks. If we did, for example, we did our 70 homework, right? So that's one connection that we had to make, right? But then let's say, oh, we also did Figma Decal lesson. That's another connection that we need to make. Okay, but what if we want to unselect this, right? Then we're gonna have to draw another connection. So it just kind of creates all this, jumbled mess. And again, like what I mentioned at first, with using components, that's going to really help clean this up. But again, we're not going to really teach in this class. But yeah, having components and using variants and components will clean this up a lot. But yeah, but for this class, we're just going to stick with this messy, messy prototyping connections. Okay, layer organization is very helpful and very good to it's a good habit to get into. Because once you kind of have a bunch of different frames, it's kind of good to have an idea of which frame you want to look for and which one it wants to go to, right? So for example, I think the right-hand column is what we have for our lecture slides. So we just have PF prototyping function /4, 5, 6, 7, 8, etc. And then in our first image, layers are kind of messy and kind of like labeled as check trash. We have like 3 different check trash. So it's like which one is the actual one? Which one are we going for? So that's why kind of understanding maybe naming and also layering it properly is going to really help with prototyping, just easing that mess. Okay, so again, reiterating again using components and invariants. Here, the organization under this layers panel, you can see that we have another layer here under 16 and 32, right? So all these 32, yeah, all these 32, all these 8 is all under this one layer, and all these 16 are under this layer. So it just kind of helps us, like, you know, grouping and kind of layering all these kind of helps us understand what we're going for. Okay. All right. And then when we're prototyping in Figma, there's going to be multiple flows for our prototype in one page. So we can have like different user journeys in our designs. And by definition, a flow is basically a path that users take. So if you're going to go onto Spotify, like there's one user flow could be like going to your library and then clicking on a specific song, right? So that's one flow, right? There's going to be a million different flows throughout a simple design. But again, when we're prototyping, oftentimes we don't need to show all these flows, especially when we're communicating with engineers. We can just show, you know, one flow, and then they have a gist of what to kind of expect for all the different flows. Okay. And then multiple flows have different starting points, and which can be helpful and could be helpful for iterating or kind of helping decide between different designs. So like A/B testing. Yeah, so to create flows in your design, you can go to, once you go into your prototype panel, you can just start creating a connection between two different frames, and it automatically creates a starting point. When you have this, see this flow 1 with a play button here, that signifies like a starting point. Okay, and then you can add a starting point by again, you can select the starting frame and then click in the flow. And then you can also select and right click the starting frame and then click add. And then you can also duplicate a frame with existing starting point. So yeah, so there's multiple different ways that you can add a starting point. Okay, again, so this is where you would have multiple different flows. So this would be just your one file, and there's going to be like different flows, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like 5 different flows here, right? We'll also have this in our demo, so maybe that'll kind of help you understand a little bit better. But having different flows kind of just, you know, helps you segment your different parts of your UI. So when you're doing user testing and feedback, it's a lot more efficient. Okay, and then also naming flows. So I think the default is usually just like flow 1, flow 2, flow 3. When you kind of start, you know, making a lot more flows, it's going to get a lot more complicated. So you do want to name your flows accordingly, so you know what each flow is doing. So you can do this by going to prototype. You'll have your starting point. You can just click on this flow 1, and you can easily just change the name. And you can also have a description for the flow. So in presentation mode, you can toggle between each different flow on the same page as well. So yeah, so having a different name is really helpful for you to navigate between one or the other. Okay, so I'm gonna do a really quick demo. Do you guys have any questions? Okay. Okay. For this one. Okay, I'm gonna copy this real quick. Duplicate. Oh, that did not do it. No. Copy. Duplicate. There we go. Okay. So in this demo, what we want to do is add an overlay sidebar, navigate to a new page, and prototype a button click on the Force Study app, timer app. Okay. So first, what we want to do, so just gonna go over our what we have so far. This is going to be our overlay menu, our sidebar. Okay. And this is going to be our main screen. It's P main. And this is going to be our setting. And this is going to be our settings with counting turned on. Okay. So first off, what we want to do is create the overlay, right? So here, again, here's our design panel. We can click over to prototype. Ooh, let's delete all these. Okay. Okay, I think that clears it. Okay, so what we want to do is first, when we click on this menu, we want to open an overlay, right? So what we can do is point. So this is our node, our starting point, and then we can point it to our sidebar. And here interaction details will pop up. So again, we want to open overlay, right? So we can do on tap, and we can click here to open overlay, right? Open overlay to the sidebar. Here we can, you know, if we want to center it, we can center it. Centering would be something like this. We can also move it down here, up here, etc. But just for the sake of what we want to do, we just want to show it on the top left, right? So we want it to kind of just we just want it to open like this, right? So what we can do, let's go back to details. We can just do top left here. Here, there's other options to close when clicking outside. We can turn this off for now, and also add background behind overlay. We can turn it off for now. We can turn it back on to show you what happens first. But so yeah, so that's how we create a first kind of first flow and connection. So we can see what does that do. So again, what we had, so ours actually flow one at first. So we're gonna click this and see how it opens, right? And you see if we click outside, it's not going to do anything, right? There's nothing that's going to happen, right? So what we can do is we can close when clicking outside, add background behind overlay, and then we play this again, flow one. Right, we can click on this again, it'll open up, click back outside, I'll kind of close back out. There we go. Okay. So yeah, so that's our overlay part, right? And next part, we want a connection to our settings. Okay, so we have a settings here. We can click here at the node. And when we click on there, we want to navigate to here, right? We can navigate to here, and then we can do an animation, right? We can do slide in, slide out, move in, move out. Let's do slide in. Okay. All right, and then you can do left, right, down, up, however you see fit. And then here from settings, we can also create another connection from the counting exceeded time, right? So here, normally when you see like a button, kind of animated button, this is where we kind of want to think about using smart animate, right? So let's just do instant to show you what it looks like. Okay, so so we just clicked on settings, and what we had was just instant, right? This is how it's gonna look. It just instantly went over, right? So that doesn't really seem as natural as what you would normally see. So normally what we want to do is we can just simply do smart animate. Okay. And then let me point this back. And that should also be smart animate as well. Yep. Okay. And then we can go back here, refresh this, go back to flow one. Okay. And see how it's slowed its pace, right? So it's not instantaneous, and it kind of slides way back and forth. Okay. All right. So a couple other things that we need to kind of connect is the exit button, right? So we're gonna have to create an exit pointer back to our main page from both of our settings. So again, we can do smart animate, or we can slide in and slide out, right? So I think for when we did settings when we opened the settings, I think we said slide in, right? So why don't we try sliding out? Okay, when we exit, so slide out. Okay, it's sliding out. And also here, there should also be sliding out. Okay. So yeah, Let's see, we can play this, we can refresh this. Okay, we're good on that. Okay, so yeah, so when we're in flow one, okay, we can open, we can click on settings, right? We can also click X, it'll go back to our main page. We can also click outside and it'll go back out, exit the overlay. So settings, we have our counting exceeded time, right? And you can see it kind of slides back out, right? Kind of sliding in, and then we can also have the sliding back out, right? Okay. So oftentimes when you're prototyping, maybe if you thought you had like plant, right? Let's say we didn't prototype plant to be anything, right? But sometimes you might forget and you click on plant and you don't see anything, right? You don't see any actions happening, but you see there's a little blue highlight that's showing up in the top left corner. So that kind of tells you what actually exists on your screen. So this is kind of a good way to kind of make sure like, you know, you have all your connections properly aligned. So yeah, so like right here, obviously I'm trying to click tags, but I don't have it pointing anywhere. So it kind of highlights settings to be the one place that kind of exists where you already prototype. Okay, so yeah. Let's see. And lastly, yeah, so lastly, the one thing I want to also mention, like again, renaming your flow. So this is where we started, right? We can easily rename this flow to be, let's see, lecture demo 3.1, right? So we can kind of easily tell apart and distinguish what each flow represents. So see, as it also like automatically updates as well, and if you keep your present tab open. Okay, yeah. So the first two examples that we saw, like right here, was named example flow and class demo flow, and then this is the one that we created today, lecture demo 3.1. Okay. So yeah, so these are all multiple flows, different flows in the same kind of file. Okay. So that's something that we like, again, we talked about during the theoretical kind of part of the lecture. Okay. Any questions on that? Okay. I think that covers the demo. I think we can wrap it up now.
Okay, sweet. Thank you so much, everyone. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up for today. There is no homework 5. The homework 5 is to work on the midterm this week. Same goes for next week. There's no homework for week 6. Please use your time wisely. We know that it's midterm season for like all of your classes, so we totally understand. And again, if you need more time on the midterm, please just let us know as soon as possible. We're more than happy to accommodate it. Please do not lose your mind doing a decal midterm. That is not what you go to the school for. We do really just want to make sure that this project is a chance for you to really explore like an actual design project from start to finish all the way through. So we want to make sure that you have the time to do it. So feel free to go wide and go deep with your ideas and any of your approaches. This week's lab is doing a lot more hands-on work with basic prototyping. We know this is like one of the hardest skills to just teach you in a lecture basis. So the lab is going to cover a lot of different examples and basically give you the kind of practice that homework normally would have. So we'll be going through a lot of different visualizations of basic animations and triggers. The secret word for today will be, you pick one, Nick.
Audio.
Audio. God, okay. The secret word for today, for those of you who are watching online as well, is audio, AUDIO. Of which I will fix the issues next week. And until then, again, work on the midterm. As a heads up, next week's content is going to be a little bit different. We're going to dive into FigJam, which if you've seen it within Figma, it's a secondary tool made for whiteboarding. We'll talk about FigJam and then a little bit more about community, which you already use right now for homework. So a little bit less of really like critical content for figuring out your midterm, more just kind of filler content to get us through. Again, if you're interested in doing a proposal, aka something that is not one of the 4 provided prompts, please submit the proposal by this Friday night. Your TA will review it by during the weekend. And also as a final bump, please do attend office hours. You know, we really want to make that something that is available to everybody in the class, even if you don't have a specific question. the midterm is a great time to come to office hours for the first time. If you have any questions about how to tackle it, any questions about what to make your prompt, any questions about how to choose a restaurant, we are more than happy to talk through any of it. So yeah, thank you so much for coming today, and we will see you next week.
Hello.
Here's something.